Hey, good afternoon. So you enjoying lunch? Good networking? Yeah, good networking? So I am hoping, my hope for you, when you're doing this networking, at minimum, you guys should have at least 30 new LinkedIn connections. And I say that because you're sitting here at this table at least 3 times, and there's going to be 8 to 10 people at your table, and you should definitely make sure that you're getting LinkedIn with them. And then on top of that, you've got the 4 sessions, and so there's people that you're sitting with, the people that are giving the delivery. So if you can do anything today, in addition to the learning, get yourselves networked. This conference, AgileCamp, is about learn, play, and network, and not necessarily all in that order, but we hope that you can make those connections, all right? So a couple of just reminders. This afternoon, you have session 4 that's going to be coming open, and Scott Ambler, as you heard this morning, he's stuck at the Canadian border. They won't let him through. I guess too much agile knowledge for the United States. I don't know. So we've got Toyota, who's going to step in with an exercise. They're going to do some Lego exercises and kind of get you an idea of what happens with Lego and scaling Agile. That'd be kind of cool. But there's also a bunch of other great sessions during that hour. So make sure you take a look at those. One thing I didn't mention this morning was the law of 2 feet. Who knows the law of 2 feet? Someone yell it out really loud. Law of 2 feet.
If you don't like it, leave.
If you don't like it, leave. I'm so glad you're so gentle with that. Yes, if it's a talk that you're not really into or didn't meet your expectations, we invite you as program leaders and even as speakers that it's okay for you to get up and move to another room. And if you're in search for something new or different, we're open to that. So we're encouraging that kind of flow. Definitely this is all about you and your experience, and we want to make sure that you have that opportunity, you feel open to do that, and not feel like you're being rude or anything like that. We're actually encouraging that. And the next thing we also want to invite you to is we've got these great Toyota folks who are doing their doctor's clinic over here. If you haven't stopped by, please stop by, engage with them. They're Agile coaches and Scrum Masters there. You can talk about all the different hiring that they're doing or talk about Agile in general. And so they'd love to get your engagement. Now, if you're ever interested in taking the class, Scrum the Toyota Way, in which currently you get 3 certifications out of that. You get the IC Agile Foundations. You get qualified to take the PSM-1 test for the Professional Scrum Master through scrum.org. And the third one is the Toyota Certificate of Completion. So very few people have that certificate. But if you're interested in winning a free seat to that, definitely drop by, fill out your name, and they'll put you in a drawing for that. And they wanted me to communicate that to you. So, having said that, Steve Denning, gosh, I remember it was probably 2 years ago at the Business Agility Conference, and I'm like, who is that guy standing on stage? He's got these really cool Nikes, and like, you know, who's this guy? And he starts talking about his experiences, and I'm like, wait a second, this is a guy I read it about, and he's writing all these Forbes articles. I'm like, I think I've heard of this guy. And then he starts talking about a couple of books that he's written, and I'm like, wow, this guy's really smart. And then he talks about his experiences with the World Bank, and then boom, I start to recognize that Steve Denning isn't just your everyday speaker. He's beyond that. He's got a lot of insights of what's happening around the world, around the globe, not just with Agile, about things that are bigger than Agile. And I think that's what makes him really important as far as a lens and a conduit to how the outside world is impacting us and how we're impacting the outside world. So Steve's going to share with you more about his experiences, and please welcome Steve Denning.
Thanks a lot, Stacy, and happy to be here. How's it going? Great. I really get a sense there's energy and excitement that you don't really get in most conferences. Only when you get with a group of agile people together and they're inspired and they're energized. It reminds me of why I got excited about this in the first place. And I came across it 10 years ago. I happened to be writing a book on high-performance teams. And how did I get there? Well, I was born in Sydney, Australia. I grew up there. I studied psychology. I studied law, worked in a law firm in Sydney, and then I went to Oxford University and studied some more law, and then I joined the World Bank. And much of what I knew about management, I learned in the World Bank, and this, in a sense, is my mountain climbing story. Competing with Allison, right? Because the World Bank is known as perhaps the most change-resistant organization in the world. It's a wonderful organization, has brilliant people, it has unlimited amounts of money, and it has a mission to die for, relieving global poverty. And yet, it seemed for much of the time that I was there, several decades, that it was very difficult to get things done. But I was a left-brain analytic kind of person, and as you know, big organizations love that kind of person. So I climbed up the managerial ladder in the World Bank. In 1996, I was actually the director of the Africa region. Now, the Africa region handles about a third of the lending operations in this big international organization. So I'm beginning to think, hey, this is a pretty important kind of position. But then, as things happen in big organizations, the scene abruptly changed. The president of the World Bank suddenly died, and my boss unexpectedly retired. Somebody else was appointed to my position. Things not going too well for me now in the World Bank. So I went to see the layer just below the president of the World Bank and asked them, do you have anything in mind for me? Not really, they said, not really. It happens in big organizations. But I pressed them quite a bit, and eventually they said, okay, Steve, why don't you go and look into information? Now, information, February 1996, in the World Bank had the status of like the garage or the cafeteria. So I was not being offered a promotion here. I was being sent to Siberia. But I was kind of interested in information, so I went and looked at information, and we were drowning in information all over the place, couldn't find anything, wasting a ton of money, and obviously we had to clean it up. But if we cleaned it up, we'd save money, but we'd still be the same kind of slow-moving, clunky public sector lending organization. And we're never going to solve the problems of global poverty like that. So I said, why don't we do something different? Why don't we share our knowledge? As it happened, we had tremendous expertise in all sorts of areas, but very difficult to get access to this knowledge. So I said, why don't we reverse that? Why don't we make sharing knowledge our principal strategy as an organization? And this was a big strategic change, and here I am trying to change the strategy of the organization when I don't have a position. And in fact, I'm in the process of being kicked out of the organization. So when people ask me what are my chances of actually pulling this off, zero. This is the world's most difficult change-resistant organization. So I started out, and that seemed to be like the likely outcome, because when I told people, why don't we share our knowledge, the answer was, Steve, this is the World Bank. We're a bank. We lend money. That's what pays your salary. Keep your eye on the ball. We are a lending organization. It didn't seem to work too well. So I showed slides, I gave reasons, I got statistics, I did everything, and no progress at all until I stumbled on a story. I would be talking about the future of the World Bank and what's it going to be like. Well, I said it's going to be like today. In June 1995, and this is still in early 1996, a health worker in a little village in Zambia in Africa logged onto the website for the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, Georgia, and got the answer to a question on how to treat malaria. Now, that was June 1995, not June 2018. Wasn't the capital of Zambia. It was a little village 600 kilometers away. And this is a rich country, not a rich country. This is Zambia, one of the poorest countries in the world. But you know, the most important part of this picture for us in the World Bank? The World Bank is not in this picture. The World Bank does not have its knowledge organized to share its knowledge with all the people who make decisions about poverty. But just imagine if it was. Just imagine if we got organized. Think what an organization we could become. And yeah, that started to resonate first with staff, and then managers, and then senior managers, and then the president of the World Bank heard about it, and he said, right, let's do it. He went to the annual meeting of the World Bank in October 1, 1996, and announced to 170 finance ministers, all their entourages, huge public occasion, we are going to do this. We are going to share our knowledge with the world. We are going to become the knowledge bank. And when the people who'd sent me to Siberia just a few months before this announcement heard this announcement, they were horrified, because now the man from Siberia was back. And not only back, but somehow managed to co-opt a whole group of staff, and now even the president, to pursue this lunatic idea of becoming a knowledge-sharing organization. So this wasn't the end of my career. This was just the beginning of a new set of battles. But those battles were a bit like climbing Mount Everest. And after 4 years, we had, in fact, changed the strategy of the organization, despite the low probability of having achieved that. So I learned a great deal in the World Bank. And when I left in 2000, people asked me, well, how did you pull that off? How did you pull off Mission Impossible? And I had to confess, as a left-brain analytic person, that it was through leadership storytelling. So I wandered around the Fortune 500 and taught them how to tell stories. But I noticed these stories didn't stick. They didn't last. They affected change, but the change didn't last. So I started to ask, is there intelligent life in organizations? Is it possible to find intelligent organizations anywhere on the planet? And I stumbled in 2008 on Agile, that I found these software developers who had solved the fundamental management problem that had stumped management thinkers for 100 years, how to get continuous innovation with disciplined execution. Big organizations could do one or the other, but they couldn't do both. This was about making this happen on a systematic basis, time after time after time. So I thought this is going to be a huge idea. This is not just software development. This is the way all organizations should be moving in this direction. So I wrote a book about it and said this is going to be a big idea that will change the world. And the reaction of that in software development was, yay, that's fantastic, you're listening, someone's listening to us finally. But in general management, there was a different kind of reaction. No way were these people ever going to learn anything from software developers. These were people in the basement. They were the worst managed group in the whole organization. No, totally unbelievable that we could ever learn anything about management from these people. And so I'd go to places like the Drucker Forum, the world's premier general management forum, and this is what they'd tell me when I started talking about Agile. It's only for software, doesn't scale, can't handle complexity, isn't reliable, doesn't last, go away, stop bothering us. This is not serious. And you even had people like the CEO of IBM saying things like this. So of course, at that time, Apple was already 4 times larger than IBM in terms of market cap, and now it's 8 times larger than IBM. So the reality that was actually happening in the world was not being captured by the people who are management experts in the world. But where do things stand today? Well, things have changed dramatically. I have written this, that Agile is eating the world. It feels very different from even just 2 years ago when I felt we were trying to push this big rock up a hill. Now we seem to be careening down the other side of the mountain, for better or for worse. And what's driving this is in part this recognition that these firms, the 5 biggest and fastest growing firms on the planet, are in fact implementing these ideas and are able to move with much greater agility than any of those big dinosaurs of the 20th century. And they are delivering this kind of performance: instant, frictionless, intimate, incremental, risk-free value at scale. This, you get on your phone immediately what you want, and it's frictionless. It's very easy to do, and it's directed intimately at you. It's for you only, and it keeps getting better. And you hope that it's risk-free, and generally is. And it's reaching hundreds, thousands, and billions of people. So this level of performance is what all organizations really are going to have to aspire to succeed and prosper in the 21st century. And this is what's driving these surveys. More than 90% of senior executives give high priority to becoming agile, although They recognize that less than 10% of organizations have accomplished this, so there's a little bit of progress still to be made, and articles appearing right and left. This is the way of the future. But it is a fairly chaotic world out there in terms of understanding what are all these different writers talking about. Is 40 Shades of Grey here? Is there some common theme, or is it just noise? Is it simply chaos? So in 2015, I got together with some companies and said, let's try to sort out what is going on. What is actually happening? What is real? What is fake? And so these companies got together and formed a learning consortium, which is still continuing to learn. And one of those companies was a little firm called Microsoft. And when we went there, I'd been there 10 years ago, and I thought the World Bank was bureaucratic, but my God, Microsoft, it was a nightmare. But when we went there in 2015, we saw that they had strongholds of Agile, not everywhere, but strongholds of Agile that were really transforming the organization. And it looked a bit like this.
Today, a market opportunity comes and goes very, very quickly. We buy software with the touch of a finger on our phones, on our mobile devices, from our computers, and we do that every day. When I look back to software 10 years ago, you could spend a year planning, spend a year coding, and then spend a year delivering.
Those days are gone, okay? Today the world is, hey, I've got an idea. I want to think about how fast I can translate that idea into reality and get it to my customer's hands, then understand what my customer's experience is, what my customer is doing with that, and take that knowledge and learning and make my application or my service better.
And there's a new market demand, and there's a new competitor, and there's new business, and there's new opportunity, and we have to go take advantage of those things. And so, as a business, if you don't adapt to that, you're just going to die a slow, painful, ugly death.
It's a huge shift, and it's a huge shift for everybody.
What you really want to do is think about providing the level of agility that each team needs to have to be able to do what they need to do, but also know that they all are going to accrue value to one service or one application at the end of the day.
It's about how you manage change. Changing the culture for a small team of 10 or 15 or even 20, 30 people is one thing. Changing the culture for 500, 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 people is a much bigger deal.
Are organizations and companies that can adapt very quickly to changes in the business landscape, in the customer landscape, the technology landscape, are always going to be in a position to immediately adjust and deliver something new. And the company who's on a long-range 2- and 3-year plan will have missed it.
So you either become agile or you die a slow, painful, ugly death. That's basically the choice facing many big organizations today. And we set out to discover what do successful agile firms actually do. And the most important thing we discovered is that agile is a mindset, that it's not a system or a methodology or a structure or a platform or a big data. It's about a different way of thinking and acting in the workplace. And what we saw was that when firms had this mindset, benefits flowed, no matter what the process is. But if they didn't have the mindset, didn't matter if they're implementing the Scrum Guide and every other guide on the planet, they got no benefits from it. So it seemed that there was this rather difficult to understand thing, a mindset which was driving the benefits. And we spent quite a bit of time trying to think through, well, what exactly is this mindset and how do you acquire it? And it is, in simple terms, a way of understanding and seeing and acting in the world. And we also came to see that throughout history, although a mindset sounds like a rather fragile, ephemeral thing, in fact, big social changes have often had a mindset driving them. Just a couple of big cases in history, the Protestant Reformation. Martin Luther, 1517, had 95 theses and a couple of thousand words, but it was a very simple idea, a mindset that was driving the huge change that happened, salvation by faith alone. That simple mindset caused massive massive social changes across the world. And the revolution in science. You can plow through Sir Francis Bacon's 1620 book, 95,000 words. But the core idea of it that's driven science ever since, that you do experiments not to confirm what you know, but to disprove what you know. There's been no agreement ever since then of what exactly are the processes to follow, but that idea is central and still driving the scientific revolution in the world. Or if you take the United States, the Constitution is 10,000 words, but you might say that the idea of America was crystallized by Abraham Lincoln, 1863. The idea of America is government of the people, by the people, for the people. And that is an idea that continues to drive the country forward and has been a beacon to the rest of the world. So those huge historical changes are driven by simple mindsets. So we started to think, what is it about a mindset that has this kind of capability? It's memorable, it's plausible, and it's something that people feel deeply about. And they feel so deeply about that it actually drives huge change around the world. So if you look at traditional management, the dominant business philosophy still today is this: maximizing shareholder value, at least in the private sector. The purpose of the work is to make more money for the company. A rather uninspiring goal. But that, you listen to quarterly statements by corporations, that's what they tell you is their goal. To make more money and for the company, its shareholders, and its executives. Peter Drucker, of course, said making money is the result, not the goal of the organization, but people didn't, those finance types didn't listen to that. And so this idea, this mindset continues to drive a lot of action in the organizational world. The manifesto, the Agile Manifesto, I think if you talk to those 17 guys, and they were all guys, about why they wrote what they did in 2001, I think it's fair to say that overall they were trying to make things better for software developers. They were trying to make the world safe for software developers so that they could get on with doing what they like doing, namely writing good software. The idea of changing the world, I don't think, was on their agenda at the time. It was latecomers, like some of you, who came along and said, hey, this is a bigger idea than that. This is an idea that could change the world. And so is there a core idea? Is there a simple idea driving this? I'm suggesting in my book that it is this. Human beings creating more value for other human beings. That, I believe, is the why people are excited at conferences like this and the Agile Alliance conference. You go there and you sense that people are inspired, they're energized, and I think this is the idea underlying it, which is causing that energy and that excitement. And acquiring this mindset is another conundrum. We can talk more about it. I think Martin Fowler and others have pointed to this martial arts dictum shu hari, where you start by following a set of rigid rules, then you start to learn more about the theory of it and start to make adjustments, and finally you become a master of the approach and are able to create your own set of practices for your own circumstances. And you see organizations going through that process. If you look at what are the biggest problems we're facing with the Agile mindset, one is to understand what it is. And often firms get stuck on Agile as a set of processes. They never get to the mindset at all. Or they get stuck at the shu stage of shu hari. And they fail to grow the Agile mindset organically within the firm. They start having consultants come in and tell them this is the way you should be thinking. And of course people say, well, good luck to you. It doesn't, you don't change mindsets by telling people to change their mindset. So this is one of the practical problems, challenges we're all facing. How do we enable corporations, organizations to embrace and live the Agile mindset? within the Agile mindset, I've suggested there are 3 central ideas, or I've provocatively called them laws, to indicate these are pretty important. Unless you obey these laws, you're not really on the path to genuine Agile. And it's the law of the customer, the law of the small team, and the law of the network. And starting with the law of the customer, the idea that there is only one valid purpose of a firm, an organization, to create a customer. Peter Drucker said this in 1954 and kept on saying it. And for a long time, people didn't listen too much to him. But as the customer became increasingly powerful, his insight became even more important. And he said, as you note, there is only one valid purpose, not several, only one. This is the only valid purpose of a private sector organization. And I've suggested this is similar to the Copernican revolution in astronomy. 16th century, Copernicus came along and said, what everyone knows, that the sun revolves around the earth, confirmed by the evidence of our senses, that's wrong. It's actually the opposite. We are revolving around the sun. Doesn't look that way, but that's what's happening. That was a huge revolution. Took the Roman Catholic Church a couple of hundred years to accept that, but eventually they did. These changes can take a long time. And I'm suggesting it's a similar kind of change in Agile. This is a shift from the 20th century position that the firm was the big firms were at the center of the marketplace and customers were somewhere out there on the periphery. You dealt with them if necessary, but basically you were driven by internal forces. Now the customer is at the center of the universe, the commercial universe. They are now the boss of the organization, and organizations that don't recognize that are going to find it very difficult in the 21st century. And everyone in the organization must have a clear line of sight to the person for whom their work is adding value. If they can't see that, they should be asking, why am I doing this work? Why is this work even being part of the what this organization is doing? And this is different from having customer focus. Throughout the 20th century, big firms would say, our top priority is to add value to the customer. But what they didn't mention was that there is a proviso saying, well, actually, we do this, but only within the constraints of our systems and processes. I mean, one example from the World Bank, back in the 90s, when there was a lot of brouhaha about why the World Bank operated so slowly. And it took 3 years to process a loan from the time the government would ask for a loan and the time they actually got a loan. And people say, well, 3 years seems an awfully long time. Can't you do it faster? And the management was humming and hawing about those. They're very complicated. So I pointed out, look, as it happens, when there's a flood, or when there's an earthquake, or when there's some big catastrophe, the World Bank has already developed a process for doing things faster. And what we do is something that people in Agile will find rather familiar. We get together a team of very competent people who know what to do. We get out of the way of those people. We give them whatever they need to actually put the loan together. And within 6 weeks, they have a great loan to respond to the flood, the earthquake, or whatever it is. That's our emergency procedure. What if we were to use that for all our loans? Then we could do loans in 6 weeks instead of 3 years. Blindingly obvious idea, but what was the reaction? As you can imagine, that is impossible. We cannot do that. Here are the 10,000 reasons why that is not going to work. We have review processes. They have to be in place. We have to check this. We have to get a plan, a perfect plan. All that takes years to put together. You can't do that in 6 weeks. Never went anywhere. So the World Bank kept on grinding away, taking 3 years to prepare loans. It wasn't that they ignored the customer, but they were just saying our internal processes are more important than your needs. So sorry, we'll get back to you when we deal with your needs. And you also have the issue of consistency of goals. I mean, you have a lot of the top management say, yes, our top value is the customer, but they go to Wall Street and they say something really quite different. Our goal is actually to make money for you guys and for the shareholders and for us, the executives. And when you have that going on, you have the agile teams on the left and financial people on the right. You have an organization which is in internal tension, and it will have to be resolved one way or the other, either by crushing agile or by changing the goal of the organization to actually accept what Peter Drucker said: the only valid purpose is to create value for the customer. And this is a huge social issue. And time is running out, but we are in the short run, we are creating value for shareholders, no question about it. So the problems on the law of the customer is failure of organizations to embrace and accept this and to give a clear line of sight to the people doing the work of the customer, the end user for which they're doing it. And this, in most big organizations, is still a big challenge, particularly public corporations, which are on really a 20th century track, not a 21st century track. So that's the law of the customer, law of the small team. This is what most of the books and the practice of the last 17 years have been about: clarifying how you get descaling big complex problems so that they can be handled by small self-organizing teams working in short cycles, getting feedback from customers, doing daily stand-ups and retrospectives, and simply doing work in this way. And it means not that you get rid of managers, but they have a very different role. They shift from controlling to enabling, resolving priorities, removing impediments instead of creating impediments, and ensuring that the dependencies between its teams are being handled by the teams. And so it's a different role. It's not that you need less managers, that you need different roles. And it's also important to recognize that there is no single agile model. I mean, you hear about people implementing the Spotify model. Well, we went to Spotify, and they are not implementing the Spotify model. So why would you be implementing a model they've already moved on? We went back a second time, and they told us what we saw on the first time. They've already changed that too. So they are continuing to evolve their own way of doing it. This is not about implementing some model. This is about continuing to evolve the way you implement the whole mindset of delivering more and more value to customers. And in this area, the biggest problems I've seen are the teams are not really teams at all. They're little hierarchies. You see 5 people, and you have each of the person is reporting to someone else up a little hierarchy of 5 people. They're not really teams at all. Or the other big problem is that the team doesn't complete work in a short cycle. And so the teams are continually building up work in front of them, and you have too much work in process, and then the firm says, well, agile doesn't work. You have to get to the point of finally getting work fully done at the end of each cycle. And then the law of the network, the third law is having the organization function as a fluid network, where instead of having this top-down steep pyramid where decisions go up the pyramid and come back down again, this is about information flowing fluidly across the organization, up the organization. Ideas can come from anywhere. This is, there are multiple paths to yes. There's not a single chain that any one of 20 managers can block any new idea. It's about creating lots of opportunities for small improvements to take place. And it's a different way of structuring organizations. As I say, 10 years ago, people were telling me it's not possible to do this, but you now see organizations of tens of thousands of people being organized as a network, not as a steep hierarchy. And if you want an extreme example, the US Army, Stan McChrystal's wonderful book, The Team of Teams, described how he had to shift the US command of forces in Iraq 2003 when they should have been victorious because they had unlimited resources and skilled teams and technology to die for. But in fact, they were being beaten by a bunch of terrorists with no technology except an iPhone and some improvised devices. They were facing a network, and a hierarchy facing a network simply couldn't cope. He realized he had to become a network. And so he did these things to turn the organization into a network, a common physical space where decisions were made, not a briefing session, but actually where decisions were made in real time, and exchanging staff between different silos so that it wasn't the Navy SEALs against the US Army. It was everyone was in this together. And the most important change, though, was that he had to change himself. I talked a bit about leadership this morning. He had to change from being a commander to a gardener, as he called it. That everything he'd been taught in West Point about being a leader, you had to be strong, you had to be fierce, you had to give instructions and directions and make crisp decisions. All of that he had to change into becoming a gardener who was tending the network, who was nurturing it, who was pruning it, who was feeding it, who was watering it, who was seeding it. It was, and on occasions he had to take strong action, but it was more important that he played this role of enabling this network to take decisions in a much more able fashion. And when I met him, I was expecting to meet someone like the guy on the left, sort of like a sort of a lineman, NFL lineman type, but he actually was about my height and very personable, relaxed kind of guy. He had become a gardener, so it was kind of nice to actually see him present. And so what we see now is that organizations are giving increasing attention not just to work in software and manufacturing and operations, but in these other areas, budgeting and what is normally called HR and strategy, and the top management also becoming interested in and needing to become interested in making this happen. And biggest problems in this area, going back to the first law, the customer is not driving the activity. And if the customer isn't driving the network, then you tend to have chaos in a network. There has to be an obsession with delivering value to customers so that everybody knows where you're going. And not cleaning up the back office functions or the top management and having them operate in a bureaucratic top-down fashion. That will also get in the way of a network actually functioning in the organization. So this is a journey. You never arrive. If any firm ever tells you we've arrived, we are now agile, we don't need to do any more, that means they don't understand what they're talking about. And it's been a phased approach out of the last 20 years. You look, the first 10 years, it was about how to make individual teams work. Then it switched to, well, how do we have large numbers of teams? And now the last 7 years really looking at strategy and HR and budgeting and making the whole organization and getting to business agility, not just agile teams, but having the whole organization functioning as an agile unit. And if you like, I've been talking so far about operational agility. With the agile mindset, 3 laws of agile, you get to an organization that can survive. Most of us assumed, I think 10 years ago, I assumed that if you did that, you would make a lot of money. I have come to the view that that's not the case, that there is a dark secret, that because of this shift in power in the marketplace from the seller to the buyer, from the producer to the customer, it's difficult to monetize improvements in existing products. You make the existing product better, cheaper, faster, more personalized. Customer says, fine, that's great. I want it for the same price, or I want it for less, or even more, I want it free. Someone else is providing this free. So if you're trying to monetize all these efforts that you've made to make your products better, you are in for a hard time in many sectors. So one has to think beyond simple agile teams and making different pieces of the organization agile. We have to crack this problem of how do you make money in a world in which the customer is in charge. And so that leads to the idea of strategic agility, not just making existing products better, but creating new products that bring in new customers. And for example, going back in history, I mean, Thomas Edison didn't make a better candle. He invented a light bulb, a new way of generating light. Henry Ford didn't make a faster horse. He invented a different way of getting transport done and brought in vast new numbers of customers. And the iPhone wasn't just a new mobile phone, it was a multifunction device. And it did it by removing some key features. It took away buttons, it took away the keyboard. You still run across BlackBerry users who are 10 years later are still grieving about the loss of their keyboard. And one of the key tricks in strategic agility is to remove key features. Take the feature that the customer loves the most and take it away and think, what would that enable us to reach a whole lot of new people who are not, or would enable us to do things we can't do if we keep that feature. So this means tinkering, even destroying some of the most loved features of your existing product. So it's not something that can be tackled at the base of an organization. It's going to need the top management to be involved when you start taking away features which are the most valued parts of what you currently do. And of course they added the big screen and they added color at the same time, and it became a huge, huge success. So this is about not just competing about your existing product where there's a lot of competition, but reaching out and thinking about non-customers, people who are not currently your customers. How could you bring those people into your environment and get value from opening up new markets, market creating innovation? And in the book I talk about what I think is the best articulation of how to go about this with an innovation playbook. It means thinking through, first of all and fundamentally, the most important thing, what is the need that's not currently being met? And that is the most important thing. And you might actually have to spend several years figuring out what is this need, exactly what it is, and then the approach. What is your secret sauce? What is the way in which you're going to meet this need? Calculating the costs and the benefits of what you would be doing, and then assessing the competition. And the primary competition is always that the customer does nothing. The customer continues in its current mediocre life and doesn't embrace your fancy new products. So for instance, Kurt Carlson, who devised all this, his firm's SRA International invented Siri, the gadget that was put in the iPhone. And if I had been the intended customer of Siri, it would have been a failure because I didn't want to talk to my iPhone at that time. And I still don't. And in his view, I would be continuing to live my mediocre life of not talking to my iPhones. And that is your biggest competition always, that you have this brilliant idea, a talking phone, and you have these mediocre customers who are just not willing to get out of the mediocrity and replace their life. So you look at startups and even the big firms, and they think about this kind of innovation, and their focus is often, very often, on the approach. I've got this idea, I've got this secret gadget, I've got this different way of doing things, and all the emphasis on that. What they should be focusing on is the need, not the approach, the secret sauce, but the need. What is the need that will drive this innovation, this gadget, this service, this product in the marketplace? So it's a different dimension, an additional dimension. If you want to make a lot of money out of Agile, you may have to get beyond operational Agile and add this component of strategic agility, creating new products, new services that bring in new customers. That's a sort of very rapid take on what's going on in the, what I see in the Agile world. I don't know whether we have any time for questions. Or... Yeah? Okay. I can't see anything, but you have a microphone or?
I think we have one microphone.